and safely. Well, welcome to this theme session, One World, One ICA. It's my pleasure to have you here, despite being a Sunday in Paris. So thank you very much for staying with us. We will present probably three subjects today. One of them is not, unfortunately, he couldn't make it. So we're going to kind of flip a little bit the program. And we're going to start with, and let me try it, Michael Scharkow, did I say well? And Sabine Trepte? Okay. And they're going to present us. Are all of us invited to the party, National Diversity of ICA Conferences and Membership? This is a very interesting subject. Okay, let's see if we can do a One World, One ICA.
I'm waiting for the slide to appear. So, thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Michael Scharkow, and together with my dear colleague Sabine, who's in the audience, we are presenting a paper on the national diversity of ICA conferences and membership. So ICA leadership has for some time increased the effort to care about diversity, increase diversity, national diversity, gender diversity. You see the statement up here by the Executive Committee of ICA, and we can assume that there's a growing interest in this topic. However, we don't have much information regarding membership of scientific organizations such as ICA, but also conferences. What we do have is information concerning the national diversity of authors, of scholars who submit journal articles, for example. And you see up here, we knew historically more than 2/3 of all communication journal authors were based in the US. That has decreased over the years a little bit, but we still know, for example, by an earlier paper by Sabine Trepte and Laura Lotz, that about a handful of countries account for more than 80% of all content that is published in ICA journals and related peer-reviewed journals. So we wondered, is it the same for ICA conferences? Is it different in some way? How does the national diversity of ICA conferences and also of ICA members look like? Do we see changes? And if we see changes over time, what predicts these changes? And how do ICA divisions differ? We know from the publication research that different outlets tend to have a different composition in terms of who contributes. That is related to mostly topic, but also history of these outlets. And we expect that there are also some differences between ICA divisions in terms of national affiliations of their contributors. And then lastly, because we are here at an ICA conference where much planning is involved all the time, we asked, is there a way that conference planners, division chairs, vice chairs, actually have agency in terms of increasing or decreasing national diversity through diversity programming decisions or diversity-unaware programming decisions? We collected data from 2015 to 2020, so unfortunately we are not up-to-date date, using the published online and print programs for the first years, and then for 2020 and 19, the submission site changed, if you remember, if you're a long-time member of ICA, and that made the scraping a little bit difficult, so we just asked directly. ICA Conference Services provided us with the data for this research, for which we are very thankful. They are very quick and very helpful in giving us these data files. Overall, you see a very large number of contributions and also a very large number of contributors. That is not surprising. We are here at a huge event in the Palais de Congrès. And we received additional membership data for November 2020. This is important to remember in 2 slides because there are some variations based on which year one would collect these membership files. Overall, we see conference contributions from 106 affiliated countries, and members tend to be from a smaller pool of countries, only 85. So how do we measure diversity? Well, the first thing that you can do is just what I did 2 seconds ago, is count the overall number of countries participating. But we know that this richness measure is flawed in the sense of both of these, A and B, most of these measures come from ecology. I'm sorry, that's why the picture is up there with the trees. So both of these have the same richness of species. So if you would just count the number of affiliated countries, you would not see a difference between these two forests, if you will, but one of which is much more diverse intuitively, and that's because the abundance factor comes in. So relative abundance just means how distributed are the frequency counts, if you will, of the countries involved. And ideally, they would be quite uniformly distributed, but we know most of these counts are not very uniformly distributed. So what we chose is the effective number of countries, which has the property that only if all species on this type countries were uniformly distributed, then the actual number would match the richness number. In all other cases, it's lower than that, and most of the time it's dramatically lower than that. We see this here. So we can say that our analysis of the conference submissions very much looks like what we see in publications. The top 5 countries, which are listed here, account for 75% of all conference contributions, and also for 72% of all members. So that is a very typical pattern that we see. Sabine called this the Pareto publication principle, so very few countries account for most of the publications, and also in this case for most members and conference contributions. We also see that these conferences are very, very strong mirrors of overall ICA membership. The rank correlation between these two lists is 0.9 basically, which means they are very, very similar to each other. So the nations that tend to send most scholars to ICA also tend to be those who have the most members. Overall, we see this corrected effective number of countries measure is far lower than the number of countries participating. So if everything was uniformly distributed, we would only expect participants from 3 different countries in any given ICA conference, which is a comparatively low number. If you wonder, I just put it on the slide there, Australia is missing from the membership top list, simply because, if you remember, it was the member list from 2020, and people were expecting to go to Australia for the conferences, and we know many people sign up for ICA expecting these conferences membership fees to be lower, and that's why we see this odd missing top member country for that 1 year for which we have data. Looking at longitudinal trends, we see some, if you squint your eyes, you can see some growth in diversity, mostly on the division level, but the sessions have also become somewhat more diverse. Session means like our session, how is the distribution of countries in the sessions? They tend to be lower because the sessions are smaller, but overall we see a slight upward trend. But we also see some peaks and some downward slopes, and we wondered, why is this the case? So what predicts this? And you can see this already if you look at the timeline here. Well, there's a strong effect of conference location. Whenever ICA is outside the US, the effective number of participating countries goes up, and whenever it's inside the US, then it's comparatively lower than what we would expect. And again, we see a small but substantial and significant increase in diversity over time, but the effect is really tiny for this short time interval that we cover. This is what Sabine calls the yearbook slide, where everybody just basically looks up their own picture. So you can see the sponsored sessions are overall the most diverse if you consider them a pseudo-division at the conference, which is not surprising because they tend to have these national sessions, for example, by national communication associations. And we see that on the whole there's a quite substantial variability in the effective number of countries participating, ranging from journalism studies and mobile communication to communication science and biology and interpersonal. So there are quite few substantial differences in how international these divisions are. If you just, again, this is not membership, this is submitters to these to their divisions. at ICA conferences. We see similar patterns, but some differences on the session and on the presentation level. And another way to visualize this is just looking at the correlation between the session and the division level diversity, and we see a very strong, not surprising correlation between the two. So the divisions that tend to be more international also tend to have more international panels, but there are some outliers. The most notable is the sponsored session, if you see it on the right-hand side there, which has a very diverse set of contributors, but comparatively less diverse sessions. And the DigiPook session, for example, is a sponsored session, and it's not very nationally diverse, to say the least. And we wondered, if this is the case for sponsored sessions, which happens more or less automatically, how much agency does a typical session planner have in order to increase, for example, national diversity within their division? So what we did is we simulated an alternative universe of ICA conferences by randomly assigning all submitted and accepted submissions to the actual number of slots that were available. So we didn't change the submissions, we didn't change the number of slots available, we just randomly assigned these conference contributions across all the available panel slots, which is a random procedure. And then we just looked, well, compared to these random assignments, how much more or less diverse are the actual empirically observed sessions? So we compared it, we took the middle 90% out of the equation and just checked, are you worse than the 2.5 or the 5% least diverse panel, or are you better than the 90th percentile of simulated scores? And we see that, of course, sponsored sessions are significantly, it's at the bottom of the graph. There's a much bigger graph in the paper for all the divisions and all the time slots. This is just a tiny slice, but you see the sponsored sessions are significantly below what would be expected if you randomly assigned sponsored sessions. And we also see that some of the divisions underperform in this metric. They are less diverse in terms of their panel composition than their submission situation or supply side would suggest. But we also have to say that some divisions also outperformed their diversity scores, some even in multiple years. They were better than the simulated sessions that we ran for 1,000 times. Okay, what is the conclusion of our study? We see that in agreement with all the publication-based research that, yes, the Pareto publication principle also holds for publications, or not publication, for submissions to ICA. A small number of countries accounted for a vast majority of ICA members and also conference contributions. It strongly mirrored what ICA membership is, so that is the good news. The sessions and the meetings and all the ICA conferencing is really a strong mirror of ICA membership. We also saw the slight increase over time, and we know that the outside US venues tend to increase participation of international scholars comparatively, of course. But also we see that national diversity in these panels is not only a supply side problem. You cannot just throw your hands up and say, well, that's the submissions I get. You can actively influence these sessions by careful programming. At least some divisions can. Well, what are the limitations? Of course, the reliability of these national affiliations are not perfect. Some just misprint their own affiliations, and some are missing, and some affiliations were not quite clear. We only covered a very short time span, and we didn't get the data yet for the purely virtual conference, which would be, of course, very interesting from this point of where's the conference venue. And of course, we only have some intuitions about why different divisions tend to be less or more diverse. Most of them involve history, which is kind of a catch-all term that is not really helping us theoretically. But we can see that these ICA policies seem to work a little bit in making ICA more diverse. We should also investigate the effects of interventions such as this year. I don't know how many of you filled out this diversity statements, and I have no idea what consequences arose from these diversity statements, but we can check this as empirical social researchers. And we also have to discuss how much normatively we think national diversity is a good thing and how it relates to scholarly outcomes, for example, such as quality or impact. That's out of the scope of this presentation. And the last one is, for me at least, the most important one. We can talk about diversity all day. What about the social and economic barriers to participating in these conferences? I mean, Sabine and I are very aware that two wealthy, tenured professors from Germany just spend a lot of taxpayer money to come here in this rather extravagant venue to lecture you on diversity for 15 minutes. I don't think it's a very controversial statement to say, well, if we are really serious about diversity, we really have to rethink the whole annual big conference model and think about how we can improve this by going hybrid, but also maybe integrating more of these smaller sub-conference and regional hubs and stuff like that. But I think this is where I will end, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Michael. Very interesting. I would add language barrier also, but we can discuss it later. Now we will have our second presentation. That is, oh my age, okay. That is Jasmine Wu and lots of co-authors, like 1, 2, 3, like 7 co-authors that I don't know if there is some co-author who want to be here to share. Do you want to sit here or? Okay, for the discussion. Okay, well, she will go with the paper called One Association, Many Networks. ICA memberships are an identity in the field of communication. Please. Thank
I want to do presenter view here. Any presenter view. I need my notes. I need my notes here.
There we go.
Yeah, but the notes are missing.
Yeah, presenter.
Oh.
Any one. I think this should be the one. No? Is there any technical?
No, but I look anyways.
Okay, thank
But
you.
I
so
think
much.
you need 2 screens to do that. Let me to read.
Yeah, because
Okay. We
Or
can talk
open-
about diversity in the meantime and discuss the first one.
Ah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can do it with 2 screens. More tech support, thank you so much.
Does that work? Okay, because I.
Can I do?
There we go. Just use the arrows.
Yeah, this is.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you cannot show them at the same time.
Okay. Okay, got it. Okay.
Okay, so
Never
you have
mind.
to improvise.
Yeah, improvise.
Okay,
Yeah,
let's go
sure.
and improvise.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Jasmine Wu, currently a PhD candidate at Northwestern University, and I'm very delighted to share this paper titled one association, many networks, ICA membership and identity in the field of communication. So I'm very thankful for my co-authors, Colin, Robby, Shyam, Peng, Steve, and Nicole, and Noshir, Contractor. So, okay. So the International Communication Association, considered the premier organization in the field of communication, exemplify interdisciplinarity. So since its inception in 1950 as the National Society for the Study of Communication, ICA has sought to be a scholarly home for fostering methodologies, philosophies, courses, and curricula for the needs of human relations at all levels. As of 2020, because we used the data from the 2020 International Communication Association, there are 25 divisions and 8 interest groups serving more than 4,000 members worldwide. I see many academic organizations, people identify themselves not only with the larger ICA, but also with the subgroups in which they pursue research interests alongside fellow specialists. So here, despite the diversity of the organization, formalized interactions across these divisions, across the subgroups, seems hindered. For example, of 505 sessions in the 2020 conference, cross-sponsorship between dividees was extremely rare. And this is likely due in part to the technical challenges in creating co-sponsorships. But this relative absence of cooperation belies an association whose divisions and interest groups sometimes have more in common. There is certainly a significant overlap between dividees, but it's not clear where the overlaps are. However, there is empirical evidence of these connections in the form of division membership data as well as the submission data. By identifying the specific overlaps, we aim to highlight the synergies in the field of communication and provide insights into how the organizations can better identify and support innovation in the emerging subfields. So here we'd like to address 4 main research questions: author distribution, member submission distribution, and internationalization. So what we have been talked about the national diversity, so this topic. So in this study, we utilized the data on the ICA 2020 membership and submissions, and we used descriptive analysis to understand patterns and trends in members' engagement with the association. For example, we used network analysis to study dividees as complex entities with overlapping members and topical interest. The data collection took place against the backdrop of ICA's efforts to internationalize, and with several new interest groups forming in recent years. So this is an opportune moment to study ICA and reflect on what the submission and membership data illustrate the association and the field of communication. So let's look at the results of these 4 themes one by one. So first, let's look at the author distribution. We can see in figure on the left side, 74% of authors authored their work to a single dividee, largely because most of the authors authored only one submission. So 66% of them authored only one submission. And a majority of people with multiple submissions authored to multiple dividees. So 2,039 people authored multiple submissions. 64% of authors who had exactly 2 submissions sent their work to multiple dividees. And 86% of authors who had exactly 3 submissions sent their work to multiple dividees. To summarize, the authors with multiple submissions had a higher likelihood of submitting to multiple DVG instead of sticking with a single DVG. So this is the degree of the concentration of submissions. So we can see the degree of concentration of submissions varied considerably across DVGs. So at the higher end, 65% of authors in the language and social interaction division authored only to this specific division, while on the lower end, 35% of the mobile communication authors sent their work only to mobile com. So we can see here the mobile com is a significant outlier. One way to interpret this is that mobile com attracts scholars from other DVGs such as com and tech, who are drawn to the topic, the formats, and the methods. And another interpretation is that in emerging subfield like mobile com and human-machine communication, members could be less concerned with the traditional boundaries and are more likely to explore additional DVGs. So authors who had only one submissions are colored here in the lighter green. So when we see that what we see here is that the sports com, public relations, and ORCOM had a relatively large portion of their authors with multiple submissions, sending all their work to this specific divisions. And this is a co-submission network. So two DVGs are connected if authors send their work to both of the DVGs. So nodes with the same color belong to the same cluster, meaning that they tend to send their work to a combinations of the DVGs, like within the same cluster. And one important trend here is that some large DVGs are strongly connected with each other. Like health com and tech, and mass communication are in the same cluster. This suggests the authors can consider their options and situate their work in terms of a community. And consequently, topical conversation may previously have been largely confined to one of a smaller number of the divisions, are now taking place at a variety of ways across a wider variety of DVGs. Next, let's look at the membership distribution. So of over 3,000 members, like within ICA, they belong to around 2.5 DVGs on average, and 45% belong to one DVG, and 25% are in two, 16% are in three, 8% are in four, and 11% are in more than four DVGs. So if we look at the membership, this co-membership network, if we look at the members who are in multiple DVGs, we found that ICA members see DVGs as interrelated and as part of the larger intellectual cluster, rather than the standalone units. So we see again those in purple, including health com and tech, represent the largest DVGs, seem to tilt towards the research that is oriented towards more quantitative methods and the novel media technologies, and those in green, like for example, children, adolescents, and media divisions seem to represent the DVG that lean towards the critical and cultural studies, like with the methods drawn in part from the humanities. And those in orange, for example, the interpersonal communication division, seem to represent the DVGs that are rooted in the core tradition of communication as a field. And if we look at the percentage of DVG members who only submit to other DVGs, so membership exploration, essentially. So we see that the DVG whose members were most likely to author to other devicees is the intercultural communication. So this set of results show that the members aspire to keep up with the more areas of the field, and it suggests a healthy cross-divisional outlook among members, namely less silo mentality, like more collaborative, and bodes well for the cross-paneling at conferences. The last but not the least, the internationalization. So although internationalization has been a priority for ICA in the recent years, we can see here the US-centric nature of ICA is still reflecting in the fact that all but only 5 DVGs had more than 50% of their members based in the US. And the only 5 DVGs to have fewer than half the members based in the US were human-machine communication, children, adolescents, and media, political communication, mobile comm, and journalism studies. So this US-centric nature, in part, the results of the is in part the result of the continued strength of the American universities as the sites of research labs and other scientific investment, as well as the outsized role of the U.S.-centric graduate programs in training future researchers. So another consequence could be that ICA is more likely to export U.S. academic norms than its imports those of the less represented countries or districts. So future research may want to further examine where the DVG leadership comes from, as well as analyze the topics presented in the submissions within and across the DVGs. So to summarize, this paper has offered a descriptive analysis, a descriptive study of ICA using the recent membership and paper submission data to understand, first, the relationship among different divisions and interest groups, and second, the ways that DVGs overlap in terms of their membership and submissions. And our results highlight the differences in membership compared with the submission numbers, internationalization between DVGs, and the clusters among DVGs. And this study also raised the question of what interdisciplinary in the field of communication does and should look like in this field, and what it portends in terms of the in terms of maintaining the hierarchical structures, and what kind of changes may or may not take place in the field in the years to come. Thus, we see this paper as a chance to discuss the present and future of both ICA and the field of communication as evolving communities of knowledge. So that's all. Thank you, and welcoming any questions and comments.
Thank you very much for this interesting work. Okay, so what we're going to do now is to play the video, if you are okay with that, for the person who couldn't make it here. And then I invite the co-authors that they were so shy, they didn't want to come, to have a nice talk about this wonderful topic. Oh, so it's in French. Okay. Okay, ICA. There we go.
Hello, I'm George Barnett,
wait.
and I'm presenting a paper with my
Someone knows how to change the screen? Some technical help here? Okay. Hey. There we go, I know. No? Okay. Duplicate? No. Écran du PC? It's good to have had French in the school, but I need some tech skills. I don't know how to duplicate the... Okay, thank you. Dupliquer en French.
Rule of thumb is put it on full screen and I put it in. Co-author Hanmu Park, which is a network analysis of ICA's fellows. Elite scholars tend to have few co-authors and publish alone. They have few international collaborations and are likely to build bridges across networks. Members of elite scholarly organizations nominate others to these associations. Prior research on ICA indicates that it was differentiated by three dimensions: mass from interpersonal, humanistic from scientific, and theoretical to applied. Within communication, men tend to publish more than women. Do these patterns hold for communications intellectual leaders? ICA is a large international association with representatives from 82 countries. In the spring of 2020, there were 229 living or deceased fellows, less than 5.1% of the membership. By examining the ICA Fellows' patterns of co-authorship, we may gain insights into their collaborative behavior. Prior research suggests a research question and two hypotheses. The research question is, what is the structure of the ICA Fellows Network? Hypothesis 1, the pattern of co-authorships among ICA Fellows will cluster into separate communities. These communities will be based upon their research areas, epistemologies, or geographical locations. Hypothesis 2, the role of ICA president, gender, number of publications, citations, and H-index score determines the position of individual fellows in their network. Data on the fellows' number of publications, number of citations, and H-factor scores, and their co-authorships with other ICA fellows were collected with Google Scholar. The co-authorship data, who collaborates with whom, was network analyzed. We examined several network indicators: density, a number of measures of centrality, transitivity, community detection, cluster analysis, and multidimensional scaling. The results were correlated with fellows' attributes to identify the determinants of the network structure. Results. The average number of publications was almost 130. The average number of citations was slightly over 11,500. The average H-index was 39. 42 fellows were ICA presidents, about 2/3 were male and 1/3 females. 33 received the Fisher Mentorship Award. The ICA Fellows Network had a total of 5,178 co-authorships for a network density of about 10%, indicating a sparse network. There were 10 isolated scholars without a co-authorship and 2 isolated dyads. The fellows received their doctorate in 17 different countries, over 80% from the United States, with over 1/3 from 5 universities. Slightly more than 3/4 were most recently employed in North America, 13.5% in Europe, East Asia 6.1%, Australia 3.1%, and 2.2% in Israel or South Africa. As you can see, there is no readily identifiable network structure. This graphic shows the Fellows Co-Authorship Network by continent of residence. The Fellows Network was not differentiated into separate research communities. There were 13 different clusters, and the network had a modularity of 0.230, below the threshold value for meaningful communities. Only 23% tied exclusively to one group that exclude others in the network. The multidimensional scaling failed to differentiate the fellows by research focus. Another indicator that the fellows were not grouped by research or geography was the triad census. 93.7% of the possible triads had no connections. Only 6.1% had a mutual connection among two fellows. Less than 0.02% were transitive, that is, a fellow co-authored with two other fellows or resulted in closure where three fellows were co-authors. 30 collaborations were international. 5 had all European actors. 6 were among the United States and Canada. 17 included ICA presidents. Hypothesis 1 was not supported. ICA presidents were not significantly more central in the co-authorship network, and males were only slightly more central than females. Depending on the measure, the greater the number of publications, citations, and H-index score, the more central the fellow is in the network. The network analysis of ICA Fellows co-authorships revealed that they were loosely connected. There were about 10% of possible collaborations. Over 90% of the possible triads had no connections. Less than 1% had a co-author connecting 2 third parties or all 3 fellows as co-authors. Elite scholars typically have their own labs and/or research groups. Fellows often collaborate with their students who may not be fellows. 33 fellows were recipients of the Fisher Mentorship Award. Unlike research on ICA membership, fellows did not form separate communities, and the multidimensional scaling did not array fellows by research focus. There were few international collaborations. 1/3 of the fellows received their doctorates from 5 schools. 75% were employed in the United States. Only 21.1% of the cliques involved international collaborations. ICA presidents were not more central in the network. Males were slightly more central than females. Current research is examining the fellows' citation and co-citation network in the official ICA journals. We suspect that the fellows' network would be organized by their areas of research. The preliminary results found that the undirected network had a density of 21.4% with 5 isolates who did not cite and were not cited by any other fellow. The directed network had a density of 11.7%, denser than the co-authorship network. The average number of citations is slightly more than 26. 19 fellows had no publications in ICA journals, 31 had only 1, and 24 2. As you can see, the citation network had 4 tentative communities that were strongly connected. There appears to be an organizational systems group in blue, an interpersonal shown in orange, a mass and tech group in violet, with others in green. The modularity was too low. Only 17.2% of the fellows were exclusive to one group. There were many interdisciplinary connections. Publication in specific ICA journals were significantly related to centrality in the citation network. JOC was significant in terms of degree, closeness, and betweenness. HCR for closeness and betweenness, COM theory for betweenness. Publication in JCMC and CCC were not significantly related to fellow network centrality, perhaps due to their special focus or to the journal's age. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well, wherever you are, George, because he wasn't able to be in the Zoom, so we're not gonna be able to ask him questions, but I want to invite to the ones that are here and listen to your questions. Well, thank you for your presentations. They were super interesting. I don't know, I'm supposed to take online questions and in-house questions. But of course, the password is not working, so I'm going to have to do everything again. Okay, so do you have any questions? You have the microphone over there, so if you could please stand up.
Yeah. Thanks for the great and interesting presentations. I do have like 2 to 3 comments to Michael, Michael. The first thing is probably all of us have the intuition that like the higher diversity outside the US is because people from the US are staying home. Yeah, okay. The second intuition that probably most of us have is like people from lower income countries or lower middle income countries, they're probably not here at all. I mean, the question is, do you have like a differentiation between maybe UN levels of country expertise? That's the second point. And the third point was, that's more kind of a question, what's the like, normatively, do we really like want to focus on diversity within sessions? Or is it like more important to like get just people here in the first place? Thanks a lot.
Who wants to answer that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, so to your first point, yes. It's mostly the US scholars staying at home, which increases the uniformity of all the other relative to each other. And second, thanks for the suggestion. We have we have the data, it's just a list of countries. But yes, your intuition is right that lower income countries are at best attending with 1 or 2 scholars at some point, and also very intermittently. Like at some point somebody visits ICA 2017 and then never returns again, or at most until 2020 again. So it's a very rare occurrence. And you are going to take the question for the sessions.
Yeah, maybe the normative question, your third question. Of course, we can look at the session versus division versus overall our ICA level. And this is more of a statistical task, and we try to solve or answer this question by comparing the simulated data with the programming, and showed that at some parts the programming by hand is better, and sometimes machines would do a better job. And this kind of answers the question, because it already shows that we are in many parts doing a pretty good job in programming. So programming is just one part, and I'd like to cite Chakravarti here, who said, or no, sorry, this was not her, this was, I think, Vicky Meyer, who said pressure has to be applied from all sides when it comes to diversity. And programming is one issue. Then, of course, we have to think about what Michael mentioned earlier. How much does this all cost, to get here and so on? How do we approach? For example, I did a little search whether we have scholars from the Ukraine here. And this was the November deadline was way before the Russian attacks happened. And we don't have them in the program. So maybe we can look really at single countries and see what can we do to help to get them here. And ICA, as we said initially in our presentation, is already doing quite a lot, but it's not enough. So all the measures that we also learn from other parts of other idea committees, and there's a whole lot going on at in the universities themselves that also has to be applied here at ICA, obviously. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Hanan Badr. I'm from the University of Salzburg. I am currently vice chair of activism, and the question you've raised, how can planners actually increase the diversity, personally spoke to me, because the planners only work with the submissions that are submitted before the deadline in November. So what I can do as a planner is only match I would say, inclusive reviewers to the papers where I would think, or to the submissions where I think they're written by junior scholars or emerging scholars or from countries that are under research, the so what question that we sometimes deal with when they are not in the global north. So I would really would like to hear more from you about that particular aspect in the planning. If you have any more insights that were not presented in the 10 minutes presentation, would be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, one notable omission of our limitations is that we, of course, only have the accepted publications. So we were hesitant to ask ICA for even more data because we were bothering them all the time. And this is managed by Manuscript Central and Scholar One. And of course, we would, knowing what we know from the review process in journals, we would be very surprised if there wasn't a systematic bias against people from smaller countries, non-native speakers. That would completely surprise us. So we'd expect that on the way, even to attending here, there's a lot of systematic dropout from these. What? I'm really sorry. My phone seems to disagree with me. We would require the actual submitted versus the accepted publications and contributions to make that informed answer, but we don't. So, sorry.
Maybe you want to add something to that question, Jasmine and the group?
People are looking my direction here. So, Jasmine, do you want here? So, I'm just going to say one, I suppose, fairly short thing, which is, I think part of this is an ICA problem, clearly, but part of this is not an ICA problem, right? It's also our institutions.
Yes.
Right? And so one of the things that we need to do, and particularly senior scholars need to do, is to try to find ways to support and value in those situations where value counts. Meaning things like tenure and promotion decisions or hiring decisions, and show that other kinds of activities, in addition to presentations at the main ICA, but also hybrid conferences or the regional meetings, are valued as much, and try to encourage and support people to attend those and to present their research and submit their research to those as well. Otherwise, we're stuck in this kind of the rich get richer situation. We have to find ways to create networks among our institutions to support one another, especially the ones that are resource rich, to try to lift all boats here.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comment, question, please? Could you go to the microphone? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I wanted to just add to what you said, because quite recently there have been these ICA regional conferences in West East Africa, Southeast Asia, and so on. And it would be interesting to see what effect these conferences have. So I have the feeling that it doesn't really produce a lot of submissions to the global ICA, but still there might be a potential to build these networks, as you said. But I suppose you have no data about that.
Well, one of the things I would suggest with those, for instance, I mean, I think it would be splendid if there was a way for our journals, right, to say, we're going to have a special section of the best papers from those meetings. And maybe that's underway. I mean, I'm not just trying to be critical here. Maybe that is underway, but something along those lines might help to further the involvement of those parts of the world in this larger conversation.
Yeah, Herman Wessermann did this special issue in CT with the best of Global South, for example, and absolutely, that's a very good idea, and one of the many possibilities to get closer, and one of the many solutions. Really key here is, I think, that we come from so many different sides, you know, the formal sides of like programming, but also informal help. You can, for example, all of us can research in Scopus, for example, for their particular topics, and just hit the checkbox with particular countries that are not their own. And we did this a couple of times, and really you find researchers who do exactly the same thing as you do, you've never heard of them before. So this is something that we all have to do in a way, that we really look out and approach these people. So the majority has to approach and has to help the minority. This is our, you know, responsibility, I would say. Sorry.
Another question, or someone wants to reply before? We have time.
I have a thought, but I'd like to hear Francois' question.
Oh, no, go ahead then.
No, it's a synthesis thought. So please, maybe your question will help me more.
Well, I have a couple of questions and comments, but first I really want to thank all three, the authors of all three papers. This is the kind of you know, deep look into these issues that we need, and I hope you will feed back that to us so that we can use and act on it. There's a long history. Some of you have reminded us that ICA has been trying consistently to diversify in every possible way. And there's this word that we keep using, which is we must internationalize. And I was among those who challenged that word for being too vague into what exactly do we mean by that. If you were at the previous session here, I noted that we were talking to 4 new fellows here, and if you look at the program, they all came from US universities. So you would say, oh, another 4 US scholars, and sure enough, there are US scholars, but one of them was coming from South Korea, one was coming from Argentina, and so sure enough, I mean, but it's more complicated than that. So the affiliation of a scholar tells something, but it doesn't tell the full story. You can be very international with a full team of people who are based in the US. One of your studies was actually looking at where people got their PhD. That's one step into looking into the trajectories, because we live in a world where people go back and forth and travel a lot. And I think we all need to be more international in that way. You can be more international individually by traveling, by collaborating, by co-authoring with people in other cultures. That is key, I think. It should be a key objective, much more than proportions of people having affiliations outside of the US. There's the elephant of the room in the room. I think, Claudia, you mentioned it briefly when one of the papers ended. Of course, the language issue is tremendously important. I think it is the most important issue. We know how much language is an issue, language barrier. I mean, and those who don't feel comfortable in English will be hindered every step of the way to publish, to come to conference, to do this and that. I mean, when we travel, when the conference takes place elsewhere, I mean, we are in France, we are in Paris here. There's hundreds of communication scholars, top scholars just in Paris and around. And obviously, they're not all here, and maybe they have better things to do, but my assumption is that many of them don't feel comfortable enough to just blend into a conference where everything takes place in English. We've seen a few sessions where there were pre-recorded videos which were subtitled. That's a first. I mean, we did some of that with a virtual. So from COVID, maybe will come, you know, tools, new tools that we must learn to use to allow and to reach out to super clever scholars who never come to our conferences, but they just don't speak English. And that's, you know, there's so much more work to be done here. To Jasmine, this is more like it might be interesting to you to know that the sessions which are organized at ICA as being jointly sponsored by 2 divisions or interest groups is actually something that ICA started doing precisely to counter the effect of fragmentation that ICA is seeing with an increasing number of divisions and interest groups. So we thought a way to sort of encourage people in different units to work together is to give programmers additional slots for sessions that are sponsored by more than one division. And it works. Some of them do it, oh, why don't we do this together so we get one more slot? Sure enough, then scholars of 2 divisions or more will be together. But there's a real risk there, so that's really important. And then the last thing I wanted to say was that I think what I felt going through these very fast presentations, as a past president, as I'm the chair of the fellows today, I felt like I was coming out of a full medical test, and the doctor was throwing at me these tables of blood test levels and every number I saw was like, is that good? Is that bad? Should I be worried about this? Worried about that? We need to take time to look at this calmly and interpret it. This was so dense. You absolutely need to send us all the table lists so that we can look at it calmly. But we need to lean on those facts and numbers to act in a very targeted way to improve things. But prior to that, and believe it, in my experience, we're not yet mature enough to know what exactly we're trying to achieve. Again, going back to we want to be more international, we want to be more diverse. We need to unpack that before we can find the right indicators and before we can actually act on it.
Thank you so much. Okay,
please. As of this year, I think due to some nudging from our research team, when you submitted a paper, you could also submit a secondary tag. Did you guys notice this? Did anyone do it?
No.
No? No? Okay. And so, Francois, the joint sessions were effort from the planner, which I think took some communication at the last minute, was difficult. But if the logic was if the authors or submitters could do it, tag another division, at least it would make the program more searchable and see some of these linkages. But I actually haven't seen evidence of that. Like, has anyone noticed, oh, this paper's listed as a secondary? Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. And then the question, what can the planners do? I know that was geared toward internationalization, and once you have the papers in hand, it's perhaps too late. But then I was also thinking about the ways in which we encourage these collaborations between divisions, because as we analyzed in our data set, what was it, only 5 had less than 50% from the US. So the way that divisions and interest groups are organized vary greatly. Some are epistemological, some are based on methods or outcomes, right? HealthCom is more of a dependent variably oriented group, some are methodological. So the cultures within these groups seem to differ, and maybe ICA as an organization could incentivize internationalization defined at the employment level, or I like how you're making that more nuanced and at the level of where people have worked or who they are as individuals. By looking at that metric or some metric of that, and then finding a way to look at the bridges between individual submissions, the ability to subtag. So then when you're putting together a session, you look at the subtags. So you incentivize the planners to note what are all of the subtags and then highlight that somehow as a mechanism. And that's not a fully formed idea, but I think I'm trying to synthesize between the different topics here toward a potential solution. Does that make sense? Yeah, a little bit, okay.
I'd like to also answer your question or try to engage with what you just said, Francois. The question that we are trying to answer here is not, or the task that we are trying to solve here is not to have more, more diversity. This is not our task. Our task is to increase research quality. And this is the most important thing. And sometimes the way to increase research quality is over the bridge of diversity, and very often it is. And I think the point you just raised is very important, because we have to define benchmarks really, and have to define where do we want to go, what is enough, what is the number. And one important term here is field diversity. So how do we define the diversity of our field? What is our field, basically? Is it all the countries, or is it only the countries that submit? Is it all the countries that have communication scholars and universities? And this is really the next question that also Michael and I want to engage in, to think about what is the field diversity that we kind of want to represent at ICA and on our publications. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is a really important issue, and you say we're not so much interested in diversity as we're interested in equality. I half agree with you, but I half disagree with you. I agree with you that the aim shouldn't be diversity for the sake of diversity. I think what we are aiming for, at least that's how we discussed it in previous years, is if you look at the membership of ICA, there are some completely blind spots on the map. There are scholars from entire regions which we know they're out there. There are good scholars. We just don't know them. They don't know us, and we don't work together. And those blind spots, to me, are the priority. This is why we invented the regional conferences, is to reach out to those people, not so much to tell them the right way to do things, but to tell them we're interested into what you do.
Absolutely.
We want to learn more about you. So it's diversity. I would probably put it at the level of representativeness of what the global community of communication scholars looks like. And right now, our membership is biased towards North America and Europe.
And this is a crucial lack of quality, because this lack of representation is not, we do not get, I mean, we have a huge potential, and we are not using this potential because we have those blind spots.
And also because
as if we would sit at a table with 100 people and only 20 of those people speak.
Right.
Imagine, because we are 100 countries apply for ICA, and only of these 100 countries, 80% of what is talked about is is only raised by 20% of the people sitting at this table.
And it's worse than that, because
it's a question of quality, I would
think
say.
the 20% in question, they all say very much the same thing, which makes things even worse. And when you well, it's true. So when you do the effort, so many of us have traveled around the world and have had contacts with people who we didn't know and see how they did things. We were often surprised how the constraints, for example, the pressure that in some countries scholars are under would surprise you, and you learn from it. And that this is essential, that our internationalization is not trying to help these people to do like us, but trying to see what we can learn from them. And this last point about the language I forgot to mention earlier. One of the strategy we must think about is there's an interesting success story at the level of the International Journal of Communication. If those of you have been involved even as a reviewer, the International Journal of Communication has been very active into making sure that the reviewers don't mind so much the language of some of the applications we get. You might get something that says, look, this is a little sketchy at the level of English, focus on the substance. If you think there's something interesting there, then we'll save this paper and we'll help the authors rewrite it if it comes to that. We are interested in the substance. And I'm not sure we are equipped within ICA to do that with the papers we receive for the conference. I'm afraid some of those papers, and if we have to look into the data, I think that's something more qualitative we should do. Do any of these papers which were rejected might just be not well written, but actually if they were rewritten, actually they might make the mark?
Yeah, may I say something? Because I come from those zero represented countries. I come from Chile, which is in South America. No, sometimes you have to play. Small country. One of the things I would like to see in this line of research is asking why, because this is kind of an industry, if you may call it, where top journals are in English, where the best universities you can attend. So sometimes, for example, I am a more qualitative-oriented scholar, and I always looking at why. Why are the structure that allows this to happen? How can we, because on one side, I understand that ICA is an organization and they have this organizational structure, but also how do you give room to agency also? How you makes others to do something, not only ICA responsibility, but also the whole industry, if I can say that. It doesn't sound good, but it is. So I would love to see some more research on those qualitative aspects, why people feel. I remember my first time at ICA, I was like shaking, because I didn't know if I was going to say something awful, wrong. And it was super hard. And if I hadn't had those Chilean colleagues who had been before me, I probably would never have come, you know?
So, yeah, so I want to add something to that, just to speak from a junior scholar perspective. So I think like to internationalize ICA, a very important thing is the technological infrastructure. So you know, like this conference is the first hybrid conference, and I myself I'm currently organizing a tech squad, 30 student volunteer team to support 2,000 sessions, like for hybrid sessions. So some of the sessions are also live streamed to those regional hubs. So regional hubs can also see those sessions. So this is just to leverage the resources in our like junior scholars, because a lot of like junior scholars, like we are tech savvy, like we know like how to do Zooms and how to do settings. So this is something like we can contribute like to the community, and maybe this is also the next normal like for the future conferences.
Yeah. We have 1 minute, I don't know, left. I don't know if you have the last question. Do you? Very, very short.
But actually it relates to something that was said in the first presentation, in the conclusion, which was that when the conference is not in the US scholars stay home. I would actually argue the opposite, that all the other years that it is in the US, all the other people stay home. If it would not be in Paris, I would not have been here today. So I would actually say, and maybe that's a question to Francois, is it on the table because the ICA is so US dominated, that it's not in the system anymore, that every second year there is a ICA conference in the US. Is that something that you are discussing, that you're thinking about? Or is that just a thing that is not really discussed?
This is turning into a General Assembly. I like it. Well, first of all, I'm not in the executive committee or the board of directors anymore, so I personally don't decide anything. But I can tell you how we've reached this scheme of alternating between the US and abroad. We've left and abandoned completely any notion of fixed rhythm for that. We just look for opportunities. But I can tell you one thing you may have not thought of when we were trying to find the benefits of going outside of the US. There was actually an idea, and which was not an idea. You could challenge that strategy by saying that for the materiality of it, given the cost of transportation, for example, and the cost of accommodation, you could argue that it is best actually to have more conferences in the US, because you can make it more affordable, because it is central, it is well served by airlines, there's competition on those lines, and so it's cheaper. So we had tried to estimate how much it would cost. I mean, if you do your conference in some, I mean, we're going to Australia 2 years from now, right? That's going to be challenging for people who have to pay for their plane ticket. But we did check that it is actually possible, if you book early, to reach Australia at a rather interesting rate if you come from Asia, if you come from Africa, if you come from Latin America. We checked that beforehand. So it's not as simple as travel is expensive. As you know, flying from Stockholm to Rome might be more expensive than flying from Rome to New York or to Chicago, for that matter. It's a bit disturbing. So the question is really, it's more symbolic. It's when you go somewhere, you reach out to the community. I was actually saying earlier that we were a bit disappointed by the lack of participation by French scholars. That's for this conference. But there were like 8 or 9 pre-conferences organized around the country, which were extremely successful, involved a lot of French scholars. And so that's the way they felt comfortable, was a pre-conference. Fine. I mean, that's a start. That would not have happened if we were elsewhere. So we need to to have a strategy when we go somewhere, not just to think about the distance and the cost of flying there, but thinking about a strategy to reach out to the local community of scholars. And that involves some efforts to do that proactively.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to all. I don't know if because the theme panel was one word, one ICA, question mark. So I don't know if we answer it or we open it, or 2 or 3, or we open it. At least we had a very good discussion based on very good papers. So I want to thank you all, the participants and the public also. Okay, see you next year.